I wondered whether there was a police guard put on you. Did the police come and speak to you, or
Yeah, but they don't care. Just another gang member. What do they give a shit about?
now? You checked yourself out. I would imagine on medical advice that would have been about the stupidest thing you could have done.
The nurses begged me to stay, and I just told them, just do what I tell you. I'm getting out. I ended up triggering a dead man switch with a barrister, and he told me then that after 25 years of being a barrister, he'd never seen anything like it in his life.
Welcome back to part 2 of my chat with Duncan Burns. If you listen to part 1, we were talking about Duncan's life in an outlaw motorcycle gang. We left Duncan lying in the gutter after being shot in the back whilst riding his bike. Duncan was just another casualty of a gang war. We're going to pick it up from there, how that was partly a turning point of what Duncan's done with his life since that time. So we're talking 2005 when you were shot, Duncan, is that right?
Yeah, 26th of March 2005. It was Good Friday that year.
Okay. When we finished part 1, you laying on the grass. The bike had been lifted off. Other members were there protecting you, and the ambulance had been called. What's your recollection from there? What happened from there?
I went into a dream state and just had like a photo of my partner at the time and my daughter sort of just obviously come to me, that was surrounded in white light. And then I went into a dream state, and then the next thing I was still blacked out, but had pretty severe stabbing pains in my chest, in the side of my chest, which obviously I worked out later on was the doctors or the emergency medics jamming hose through my ribs and rib cage to drain the blood out of my lung cavity.
Had the bullet penetrated your lung, gone through?
Yeah, had a collapsed lung. Yeah, so I was internally bleeding.
Okay. You were taken to hospital. Were you placed under guard?
No, I was in ICU for I can't remember how long because I was pretty hazy and pretty high on the medication and the drugs that they were giving me, but also in shock too, and the effects and the effects that has on me. But I was pretty wound up while I was in ICU, so they moved me out of there pretty quick into a normal ward, which I think it was about 2 days later or thereabouts. I forced the nurses to pull the hoses out of my chest and sign myself out and walked out of the hospital without letting them stitch me up even.
Was that that was the angry macho bikie in you that got you to do that? Like it's...
I'm not 100% sure, mate. I think more to the fact that I was in shock.
Yep.
And knowing that I was still possibly a target, and knowing that I was in a well-known hospital, because it was all over the news, and knowing that even being in hospital I wasn't safe. So I basically just wanted to get out, had to get out.
That's why I wondered whether there was a police guard put on you. Did the police come and speak to you, or?
Yeah, but they don't care. Just another gang member. What do they give a shit about?
Now, fair call. I understand it. My attitude was, well, yeah, regardless, we can't have this happen. But I would imagine that your comment when the police, I'd turn up, here I'm responding to it. Duncan, that's terrible what's happened. Have you got any idea who it is? No. Was that basically your response? Because when I've turned up to hospitals in those situations, I never got a lot of information from the person.
No, well, it's not in their best interest to give out information, because giving statements can have a pretty brutal side effect. But even in saying that too, my wording to them was, I got shot in the back. I wasn't hanging around to see who it was.
I shouldn't be laughing, but yeah, where do you take
the conversation? You got to see the humour in it, I guess, at some stage.
Yeah. So you checked yourself out. I would imagine on medical advice that would have been about the stupidest thing you could have done. Did you have?
Yeah.
Was there any ramifications from that to your health? Or
Oh yeah, absolutely. The nurses begged me to stay, and I just told them, just do what I fucking tell you. I'm getting out. Yeah, I walked out of the hospital, even got to the front doors, and even by that stage, I was, swaying backwards and forwards, and my partner said to me, "You can't go, you can't go." And my response was, "Just get the fucking car, we're going." And so yeah, spent another couple of days driving around looking to get square, and thankfully I couldn't find anybody, luckily. So yeah,
yeah,
and then
it's interesting, isn't it? Because you would have been highly motivated to find the people that have done this to you, and now the older, wiser Duncan would be thinking, "Well, shit, if I did find those people, who knows where my life would be right now."
yeah, absolutely. And then so over the next 4 weeks, I was still internally bleeding. Had a couple of trips back to the hospital. Had a blood transfusion. Got stitched up, and then my GP took the stitches out too early. So then the drainage holes tore open, and I got an internal infection. So about 4 weeks later, I was trying to have a lay down at the house, and the pain in my chest when I laid down was pretty intense, and I started to get the sweats, so I knew that things weren't good. So then I drove myself back to hospital, and I can't actually remember checking myself into hospital that time, at St George Hospital. And then the next thing, I came to in a dimly lit room, and looking around, and there was a security guard in the room, and then groups of young doctors coming in, every 15, 20 minutes or whatever, looking at some charts, asking me some questions. And at one stage, I turned and looked at the security guard and said to him, what's going on, man? What's the story? And he said, "Oh, nobody can work out how you're still alive." And so the doctor came in and basically said, "We're going to cut you open from just underneath my pec muscle all the way around to my back, up level with my shoulder blade." And he said, "If need be, I'm just going to start chopping ribs out, depending on how serious it is." So I signed off on it and just said, "Yeah, do whatever you got to do." But they didn't have to cut out the ribs. They just ended up draining 3.5 liters of blood and fluid out of my lung cavity. And what the pain was that was going across onto my other lung and starting to compress my other lung. So that was the pain that I was feeling.
You weren't in a good state. Who would have figured, just because you left hospital 3 days after being shot?
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Who would have figured it went like that? The gang, you were a patched up member. Did you have their support after what happened to you? Did you feel like they had your back?
No, not really. Not to what they said that they would do. That was the reason that I left.
Yeah.
That and the fact that after I had the surgery, watching my partner bring my daughter in every day in visiting hours, as it's came to me as like, do I want to keep going down the road I'm going and end up dead next time, or whatever, or do I want to actually be a part of my daughter's life and watching her grow up? And after how it played out, and me feeling like they didn't, my so-called brothers didn't give a shit about how things played out for me, and also getting into a couple of brawls with other members within my club over that period of time as well, due to me expressing my thoughts on certain situations. I just basically said, "Oh, that's it, I'm done, I've had enough, I'm out."
Was it problematic for you walking away from it? Were you given the respect to walk away without the ramifications?
By some members, yes. By some of the other members who I'd had issues with in that time frame, in those few months, they weren't happy about it. But the guy who was my sergeant at the time basically said nobody else has taken a bullet for the patch, so he's leaving, and that's it.
Yeah, fair call. Okay, so how old were you at this stage?
29.
Okay, so what's life? What's your future plans there? What are you going to do?
Future plans was try and get back in front financially. I'd been out of work for 4 months by that stage. Um, so yeah, I was pretty well in debt. Another guy, a good mate of mine, um, rebuilt the engine on my bike, and I sold that to square up on some debts. So that was I pretty much was sort of square there. But yeah, just buried. Realistically, do what most men do. Like bury my head in work and being present or spending time with my daughter on the weekends when I wasn't at work.
Yeah.
Just in the hope that all the mental health issues that I was suffering and all that would go away at some stage. But as a lot of men find out the hard way, and I certainly did, it was only a matter of time before it all came to the surface. And years down the track, even though I'd gotten out of Sydney and moved my family to Queensland and got a job in the mines through other contacts, ended up starting, to get back into those circles due to meeting up with an old life member and still being in contact with guys, mates that I had back then in other clubs. Started back into drugs on the weekend and just escaping again.
I was going to say, what's drawing you to that, Duncan? Because you'd made that decision and you'd paid the price. You'd been shot. You've walked away. Was it again just not dealing with your own emotional traumas, or what brought you back into that?
Well, it was a combination of things, really, and I explained this to the professor that interviewed me when I was a case manager for the exit program, around gang, for the gang members.
Yeah, I wanted to talk on that, so let's just make a note there. I think that's fascinating, the work that is done there. But go on.
Yeah. Well, the professor from the uni who was, I guess, I don't know whether doing a study on the program, I suppose, came and interviewed me, and I basically rattled off what these guys could be going through, disassociating from that lifestyle. And I think even halfway through what I said, what I'd gone through and what these guys could be possibly going through, he got up and was walking around the room just trying to wrap his head around it. And by the end of that interview, he was lost for words. He said, like, fuck, no wonder these guys are where they're at mentally.
Yeah. That's and the drug dependency. You started to get into ice, and that's usually a one-way street. What was how'd you manage that?
Yeah, well, when we were living up in central Queensland, we'd come down for a holiday and bumped into an old life member and was with another member at the time who I was, my partner and I were godparents to their kids and vice versa. So we still had contact with them and still had contact with, as I said, mates from other clubs. And yeah, we moved back down to the Gold Coast and just fell back into, old habits, hanging out with them on weekends and getting into the drugs. And as I sort of, said previously, it's a lot of the time is addictions are taken on due to a form of suppression and avoidance of dealing with the mental and emotional issues that I had for me personally, and for a lot of other addicts that they've got going internally that we just don't know how to deal with. So yeah. Taking drugs and, or alcohol or any other form of addiction really is just a way to avoid dealing with what needs to be dealt with.
So it's just masking the emotions, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I would imagine your life would be fairly chaotic at that stage. You're out of the gangs, but you're dabbling in the drugs again and getting your addictions back up. what turned it round to channel your energy into youth work? Because that's where your passion lies now.
Yeah, well, after 3 or 4 years on ice, and my relationship going downhill with my girl's mum to the point where it was coming to an end. And by that stage, we were both on ice, so it was almost like a race to the finish line, so to speak. Um, and I got made redundant from my mining job. I lost my license the week before to that due to points because I was driving out to work and back. And so, things had gone that chaotic, being in, like a ice syndicate, that I had an inkling of what was going on, and the guy that I was, dealing with or working with to try and set up a business back at my home so I could come and deal with looking after my girls due to the mental health issues that both me and my partner at the time were dealing with, or not dealing with, so to speak, was actually setting me up to be the cook for the syndicate. I found a hard drive that had been planted in my house, and worked out that it had 10 pages of handwritten recipe how to cook in that hard drive. So yeah, I worked out what was going on, and things played out the way it did, and I ended up triggering a dead man switch with a barrister, and he told me then that after 25 years of being a barrister, he'd never seen anything like it in his life.
Explain what you mean by triggering a dead man switch.
It's basically like an insurance policy that, if I disappear or, suicide, that, there's a trail there for somebody to start looking into. So by that stage, I was looking at, doing possible jail time if things had kept going the way they were going. And the fact that I pissed so many people off by that stage that if I ended up in jail, I would have been dead. So the only option was to walk away from everything, and just lay low.
Your terminology, and I've seen it being done before, is basically, I'm walking away from this life, leave me alone. If something happens to me, my solicitor's got clear instructions to provide this, and that's your protection.
Yeah, well, it sort of didn't play out that way. I was actually given the details for a solicitor by a mate that was overseas at the time, because I told him what was going on, and I rolled up to that solicitor's office and sat down and drew it all out on a piece of paper and spun it around and slid it across back to the table to him and said, "This is what's going on." And he looked at it, and one of the main guys in the middle, he said, "Yeah, that's actually my client."
Oh, shit.
Who was sat in jail on remand for a fairly hefty situation. So I just couldn't believe it. So I got up and walked out, and I guess that unbeknownst to me at the time, that was what saved me. I dare say that went straight in with that solicitor into the next
I can see how that would play out. But,
the next time that he visited his client while he was inside, said, "This is what's just been presented to me." So yeah, it might be a good idea to just let him go.
On the assumption that you would have given it to someone else if it wasn't just him. So
yeah. Well, the syndicate involved people from both sides of the law, so it was pretty vast. So
you got yourself into some pretty heavy scenes there.
Yeah, just the way things flowed, especially in that lifestyle.
I can't see why there was a problem. Jesus. Okay, so you've decided you're walking away from this. You've walked away from gangs. You've walked away from the drug world that you've been back in. And, you were going to go down the path. If you became a cook, that was going to be a one-way street as well. You've decided to walk away. What did you do?
I was unemployed for 9 months, and out of that time, I lived in my car for 4 months. Unbeknownst to me, at that time, I was intermittent fasting. I was doing cold water therapy, just coming out of winter, showering in public amenities that only had cold water.
You're ahead of the times.
yeah. And anytime I sort of got cravings, I went for a walk, went for a run,
Yeah.
whatever exercise I could come up with at the time. In saying that, one weekend I bought some alcohol and started drinking, and it really hit me, and just I went to a meltdown, and stood on a chair with a rope around my neck a couple of times, and each time I got up on the chair, I couldn't step off, due to the fact of the situation I was in. I'd actually have to hang with my legs bent up
Yeah.
to do the job properly. So in the end, I'd had another daughter by that stage, so it's just something I couldn't follow through with.
And you look back at your life and you think, thank God I didn't go through that.
Majority of the time, yeah, and then there's other times, throughout my life since then that there's some times that I wish I hadn't been brought back.
Right.
That does cross my mind.
Your mental health issues, has it been diagnosed, or like it's specific?
Yeah, I had to see a criminal psychologist, because I went for a victim of crimes compensation claim that got thrown out of court, obviously, but I was diagnosed with severe depression and complex PTSD, which as I said previously, I didn't deal with. I just buried my head in work and being around and dealing with raising my daughter on the weekends when I wasn't working, and just, as I said, just pushing forward like, most men are conditioned to do throughout their lives. Which, as I said, after a period of time, it doesn't matter what I did or what most men do, it comes to the surface one way or the other.
You look relatively fit after what you've been through, and you touched on there that you started training and cold water and everything else. Getting healthy, does that help your mental health?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I do find that when I slip out of, my routines, training and eating healthily and not drinking too much or stuff along those lines, how much it actually does affect my negatively affect my mental health. And there are times that I fall out of those routines, and it's not long before it really is noticeable.
Yeah, I think it's starting to be recognised and understood, but I believe in that so much that you get that routine, you do something, you keep yourself fit and active, and you feel better about yourself, and it has to kick in.
Yeah, there's that, and there's also, it comes to a point where, for me, I had to deal with my mental health issues.
Yeah,
I had to start seeing somebody, whether it was a psychologist, and then that evolved into getting into men's work. And I've been involved in men's work for pretty much the last 5 years, more heavily in the last sort of 4 years, which is
tell us about that. Break that down for us. What you
it's been a game changer for me. Sitting in men's circle, looking at negative patterns of behaviour, negative self-belief, which in that world, all those circles, we call it our shadow, which is subconsciously driving our behaviours.
So this is in a group that's sitting around in a circle talking about their emotions and really talking like blokes don't generally talk.
Yeah, not just talking, but there's also processes as well. Like I mentioned to you prior to this, there's a documentary called The Work, that they do it's men's work the documentary was done in Folsom and San Quentin prison a few years back, and they've been doing that men's work in there for, I might be wrong, but I think it's anything up to 15 years. And if you watch that documentary, the processes that they do in there are the processes that we do in circle and away on the men's weekends. And yeah, I don't think I can pretty safely say that anybody that I've suggested to watch that doco, they've come back to me just like shaking their head like it's the most powerful thing that they've ever watched.
And
So
it's had the positive results in Folsom Prison.
yeah. Well, they get to the point from what I can understand, they've gotten to the point of having lifers ended up training up as facilitators, and the men that run the program sort of just hover around the outside
Yeah.
and keep an eye on everything. And it's there's agreements made that all gang related issues or anything that's left at the door for the 4 days of the 4 days of work that they go in and do. Yeah, it's something that I put forward to the gang program that I thought would be a great supplement for the gang program or the exit program, but it wasn't taken on board.
Talk us through the exit program, what it involves, who runs it, and the purpose of it.
Yeah, well, I worked at that stage, I was working for a community services organisation, working with migrants and long-term unemployed. I had previously worked with disengaged youth, running them through Skilling Queenslander programs. I was approached by the task force. I was contacted by them and was interviewed by them, and I'm pretty sure that one of the other guys that was there was a profiler at that interview, and interviewed as to how I got out, what I was doing, where I was at in my life, and how I wasn't coming back up on their radar. And I was basically explained, my journey after leaving club life and where I was at and what I'd been doing, in men's work, and how that had, positively affected my life and changed the trajectory of my life. So yeah, they were unbeknownst to them, I was working for the organisation that was actually going for the contract through the education department for that program. The program was set up to support men disassociating from gang life with a variety of different support sort of network, supporting them back into employment, supporting them into mental health,
so showing them that there is a path that you can actually take to break away from it, because it almost would seem insurmountable to some of them who've been in for a long time.
Absolutely. And that's why it's, a lot of them go back to that lifestyle, because it's their identity. That's who they've created. That's the identity they've created in that life. And after so many years, they don't know how to be anything else.
Duncan, it's not just OMCG bikies. It's very similar to what army guys go through. I'd say police, even to an extent, leaving your tribe, professional sportsmen. I think all these things. It's something that's been so important in your life that all the values that you carry are recognised and rewarded in that tribe you're in. Being a tough guy in the bikies and staunch and everything else that they say they are, then walking away from it, and those values aren't in civilian life or in normal life aren't valued. So I do understand what you're talking about, and the point I'm making is that I don't think it's just relevant to people walking away from gangs.
No, absolutely not. One of my closest mates, he went to the military, and pretty much some of the stories that he's got are almost identical, to a degree on the stories that I have, and we've become really good mates over the years, and we actually sat in circle together for the first time and supported each other to go through that space together. And it's exactly what you've just spoken into, like that lifestyle. Even though it's just, I guess some people would view it's at different ends of the spectrum, the toll and the consequences that it has on people are very, very similar.
Very similar. I think it's healthy for us to look at it and go, okay, well, yes, mate, I can understand what you're going through. I was in a different area, but I can appreciate what you're saying, that you've left your tribe. So interesting stuff. With youth crime, and we're speaking to you from up in Queensland, and that's very topical at the moment, Queensland youth crime. What's your thoughts on youth crime and how we can address it?
Yeah, well, I spoke about this 2 years ago when I got interviewed on a current affair
Yeah,
after that young fella ran through that red light and killed that couple that were, the woman was pregnant.
yeah, that was
And
horrendous.
the saying, it's just the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And let's face it, they've been doing the same thing since Boys Town, which was how many decades ago? The only difference is the church isn't running it or overseeing it. It's
Yeah,
the government agencies that are overseeing it, and they're doing exactly the same thing, expecting a different result. Um, yeah, 2 years ago, it was the on the headlines, and everybody, was the hot topic, and everybody was having discussions and so on and so forth. Um, the knee jerk reaction to that was build more jail cells. And by that stage, I was already deep into, doing the research and doing what I needed to do to bring forward the programs I'm talking about implementing into youth detention. And Bob Atkinson, who was the ex-police commissioner for Queensland, actually wrote a report uh, for the government around the youth justice and youth, crime issue back in 2018. And he even said in that report, spending money on, building more jails and creating more jail cells is not going to fix a problem. It's actually a waste of money. And the government still went ahead and spent, $250 million on an extension for the Brisbane Youth Detention Centre, which was originally budgeted for only 120 million. So it blew out by 2 times the amount. And what's it done? It hasn't done anything.
so what's the
And
solution you see for it? What's the alternate?
well, the solution that I've had, and once again, as I said, Bob Atkinson, sort of alluded to it in his report, is to get them out of jail cells and to have them out on farms, isolated enough so they're not going to want to run, and also not isolated enough that they can't have some sort of access to their families or some sort of access to, especially for Indigenous young people, to mob, to culture, get them out on country, reconnect them with their country and their culture, and take them through various programs within that program itself. Like it's been documented that equine therapy and even what they do down at Backtrack in Armidale,
Yeah, they've
working with
had.
dogs.
I've looked at that. They've had some great results, haven't they? Just giving
Yeah,
kids the responsibility of looking after another life, be it the dog.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. What Bernie's done down there has been amazing, and I've spent a day down there with him and with the guys that he's got running the programs down there. And his biggest thing, one of the big things that really stands out for me that he said was he refuses to deal with government. The amount of, let's face it, bureaucratic bullshit
red tape, and yeah,
that you've got to go through to get the funding, and then even then, once you've got the funding, you're at the whim of the government every 4 years. So one government comes in and wants to shit can the other government's idea just because it was their idea, and so yeah, they just end up playing politics with people's lives, and we're seeing the effects of that
so
in what's going on.
I'm with what you're saying. I honestly believe that is the way to go, and what Bernie's doing, and people like that. The counter argument would be people saying you got to get tough on crime, you got to get tough on these kids, or they're just gonna. There's no deterrent. What's your position there to argue against that?
Yeah, it's about balance. It's about finding the balance. Yeah, okay, these young people have got to understand that there's consequences when they cross the boundaries. And what we've got to understand as community and society is a majority of these young people have had their boundaries crossed on a daily basis by people that are supposed to love and care for them. Whether it be, sexual abuse, whether it be violence, whether it be neglect, whether they've grown up in situations where they've been surrounded by parents that are drug addicted, or whatever the case may be. We've got to understand that you know, they are and we are a product of our environment that we grow up in. When we start to realize that, you know, society the way it is, with the breakdown of the family unit for whatever reason that may be, and it's a very complex discussion, that we've got to understand that that's the consequences. And as, like I said, doing the same thing over and over again for decades and decades, you know, it clearly isn't working. And this is the product of that.
I think that's a valid point, because look at the recidivism in all the kids that go into the boys' homes end up, and we're saying boys, we've got to include the girls in it too. Like it's everyone's affected by it.
Yeah,
but then
absolutely.
Then go into corrective services as adults.
Absolutely, and you know, it's 90% of the youth that are involved in the youth justice system are men.
Yep.
50% of that are Indigenous. 50% of that, 10% of the youth are committing 50% of the crime. And 60% of all youth that go through the youth detention system, or youth justice system, I should say, evolve into going into corrective services with the adult corrections. So, you know, like, whether you want to say that's another form of grooming, or whether you say the system isn't working, which, you know, a vast majority of society and the community would say the system isn't working. So what's the way that we move ahead?
We've tried the hard ways, putting people in and in the hellhole of a youth detention or a prison. Seen it in New South Wales, seen it in all the states, and it just creates harder criminals when they come out.
Well, look what happened. Look at what's happened and what's come out due to the royal commissions that have been looked into, due to, you know, institutionalized sex abuse or institutionalized child abuse. Look at what's come out into the media that's happened in the Northern Territory, what's happened in WA, what's happened in all of these detention centres to these youth.
Yeah.
They're already coming from traumatized backgrounds, and all you're doing is putting more trauma on top of the trauma that they've already got, and expecting them to have a positive outcome.
Yeah.
Where's
gonna work?
Where's the sanity in that? Like, let's be realistic.
So the program, one of the programs you talk about is, you know, instead of diverting kids from going into detention centres, take them away, get them working on the land. And in something I was reading, you're big on, for 6 months, take them away for 6 months, so you've got time to change. Don't take them away Monday to Friday, let them go home on the weekend and fall back into old habits. Take them away and change the way that they look at life. And I think give them a sense of self-worth and purpose. That would be a big thing that would change someone's life.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, you know, as I said, with the programs within the program that I'm, you know, putting forward, is to have positive outcomes, that they come out with a certificate, 2 or 3 in, you know, small motors mechanics, conservation, land management, construction, whatever it is that, you know, is the fire within them, and getting to understand what it is that they're passionate about, and working with them and supporting them to get a positive outcome. So then they're in a space to be employable when they come out. There's realistically, there's no point in putting a young person in to juvie for a month or 2, engaging them in a program that, you know, takes 3 to 4 months. So they go in for a month or 2, they don't even complete the program. They don't come out with any extra tools on how to deal with the situations that they're in, and get put back into the environment that got them there in the first place.
And you just fall back into old habits. And you made a point too about including their families, like bringing their families out, because that's part of it as well. You could get a kid pointed in the right direction with all good intent when they walk out, and if they fall back into a family that doesn't support them, they're going to potentially drop back into old habits. So there's some benefits in educating the families, or whoever educates the right word, just enlighten the families on how to live their life a little bit better. Get them out for family counselling on, you know, weekend visits where they can come out and stay for the weekend. Also get, you know, the parents to understand
how they're showing up or not showing up for their children, or how they could show up differently, or for their and more supportive for their young person, their children, so they can work together as a unit and start to create, recreate the family unit.
Like a positive role model is so important to a kid going off the tracks, isn't it? And I think because, and as you said, it's a bigger issue that we know how to address, but the broken family, so there mightn't necessarily be a male role model in the family. Kids, especially young boys, need that direction to navigate their way through life.
Yeah, well, I mean, indigenous cultures did it, generations ago, where there'd be rites of passage where they were taken off the mothers to the bush or up a mountain or wherever with their cousins, the uncles, the grandfathers. Their father actually wouldn't have anything to do with their son on that part of his journey. The young men, as I said, young men will choose their mentors. If you don't surround them with healthy mentors, then we're seeing what the consequences of that are.
Yeah.
So yeah, there needs to be brought back a modernized version of the old ways, so to speak.
Well, yeah, we look at the indigenous culture, and there's so much that could be learnt from it, and that might be a very good starting point. That rite of passage, because I look at the life a lot of kids have. Where is the rite of passage? What is the rite of passage? Going to the pub when you turn 18 with your old man? What? Where's the direction?
Yeah, that's it. Or getting into drugs or gangs.
Yeah.
As I said, it's very much deep in especially a young man's DNA, to look for that rite of passage into becoming a man. And if we look at society these days, it's pretty unhealthy. Those rites of passage, or there isn't any help, or I can't say there isn't any. There is very limited healthy ways of rites of passage for young men to engage of, or that are getting any sort of media coverage, or promotion.
It's little things. I know with my son's soccer team, I coached that for years when they were teenagers, and some kids that were coming from in the team that didn't have fathers around, and they were craving male role model. You could just get a sense of it, and that was better than teaching any skills on the football field. Just being able to help direct kids at that delicate age at 14, 15, and point them in the right direction. It was very rewarding, and it's so important having that good mentor around.
Yeah, absolutely, and it actually it needs to be implemented before then, before the testosterone really starts to kick in for a young man, due to the fact that when that does, his ego starts to take over. So if we can start to engage, young men or boys into that sort of process from a slightly earlier age, then and set them on a more healthier path, that they'll be more receptive to that journey.
So what you're doing now, these programs that you talk about, where do you think we could make the big change? Because I like the ideas, and I think anyone that's sitting here listening, it would hard to argue against the logic behind the ideas and the thoughts of how we could improve the raising of young kids.
Mm.
What do you need to do, or what's the government got to do? What society got to do to really embrace the type of thing that you're talking about, and what are you doing to implement it?
Yeah, obviously there's different angles you can come at it, but the more holistically we tackle the problem, the better the outcome's going to be. Implementing different programs into the education system. Creating different programs, like I said, getting young people out of jail cells, doing rites of passage weekends, run by healthy mentors, having healthy mentors, set up through the education system as well, setting up more youth hub outreach centres and sort of slash refuges for the ones that are even involved in residential youth care that that are sort of engaged in that system that that are rebelling from that system as well. Like looking at all of those different avenues, it needs to be, and even saying that, it needs to come back to doing working with men that are in jail as well, and doing the programs like I'm suggesting there as well, to work with them so they can understand how they got themselves there and give them the opportunity to change their life trajectory. Because when they come out, they're, more often than not, they've got kids. And if they don't deal with their issues, they're just projecting their trauma on to their kids, and the cycle continues. So until we sort of look at it as from a holistic point of view, and look at dealing with, supporting men and young men on their journey, then I feel that we're going to keep traveling down the same road that we are already.
Makes a lot of sense. Anyone listening to this, if they wanted to have a bit of more of a deep dive into what you've been talking about, can you point them in a direction?
Yeah, you can check out my Facebook page, Brothers Keeper, or contact me through my personal page on social media. Outside of that, show up to a men's circle, a Mankind Project circle, if you're in Brisbane or Nerang. Just reach out and start having a conversation.
Makes a lot of sense, Duncan. So, how are you personally? We've talked about a lot of things. How are you at this stage of your life? You pointed in the right direction and content with things?
I am, and I do, like, I show up to Circle regularly. I have, my mentor from Circle. I do one-on-one sessions with him, with whatever's coming up for me. I've got a new partner who's very proactive in, doing her work as well, which is something I haven't really experienced before. And for me, it's understanding that it's not weak, or it's not manly to reach out and say, hey, I'm struggling, like, this is really what's going on for me, like, whatever it may be. I'm dealing with an addiction, I'm suicidal, I'm struggling with some pretty serious mental health issues, I've got this or that going on in my life. And like, we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what our own blind spots are, unless we've really started to dive into the work. We don't know what our our negative behaviors are, and how they negative self-worth or self-belief, how they are driving our patterns of behavior subconsciously. So it's a journey, man.
It is a journey, and I think us dumb blokes are starting to get the message, and people like yourself talking out, because no one could accuse you of shying away from tough situations and issues, and it's really enlightening hearing your perspective on things. So I just got to thank you for coming on I Catch Killers. I've really enjoyed the chat, and I've learned a bit as well. So all the best for the future, and keep up the good work.
Yeah, thanks very much, mate. And once again, I appreciate the offer to come and chat on your podcast. It's awesome.